the Ethiopian Bible is the oldest Bible. The oldest copy of the Ethiopian Bible, which is full in terms of a Genesis to Revelation copy, is 14th century.
Have you ever wondered if the Bible currently sitting on your nightstand is missing the most important part of the story? We are told that the scriptures are finished, sealed, and identical everywhere in the world. But what if that is a lie? Imagine discovering that for over 1600 years, a remote group of monks has been guarding a version of the text that changes the very ending of the resurrection. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is a physical reality locked inside a monastery in the mountains of Ethiopia. And get this, it contains a chapter that the rest of the world erased. Today we are opening the Garima Gospels to see what they didn't want you to read. The time capsule that breaks history. But before we can even touch the pages of this forbidden text, you have to understand exactly where it has been hiding, because the location is just as crazy as the book itself. We are not talking about a library in Rome or a museum in London. We are talking about the Abba Garima Monastery, perched over 7,000 feet above sea level in the Tigray region of northern Ethiopia. It is a place so remote that for centuries you could only reach it by climbing a sheer cliff face using a rope made of plaited leather. It is the kind of place you go when you want to disappear, or when you want to keep a secret that the rest of the world is not ready for. For generations, outsiders assumed the monks living there were just telling tall tales.
Abba Garima, a revered monk who is said to have written and illustrated them in a miraculous manner over the course of a single day.
They claimed they had a book written by a saint in a single day, a book that had been there since the very dawn of Christianity. Western historians laughed it off. They said it was impossible. They claimed the art style looked like it was from the 11th century, maybe 1,000 years old at best. But here's where the story takes a wild turn. A French expert named Jacques Mercier managed to get into the monastery and took a few tiny fragments of the page to Oxford University for radiocarbon dating. When the results came back, the academic world went silent. The tests revealed that the Garima Gospels were created between 330 and 650 AD. That makes them the oldest illustrated Christian manuscripts in the entire world. We are talking about a book that was written while the Roman Empire was still a superpower. It predates the King James Bible by over 1,000 years. It was already ancient when the Knights Templar were just an idea. While Europe was plunging into the Dark Ages and forgetting how to read, Ethiopia was creating masterpieces of art and literature that still look brand new today. And that puts us in a very uncomfortable position. If the history books were wrong about the age of this Bible, what else are they wrong about? If this book has sat here, untouched and unedited for nearly 2,000 years, it means it predates the political councils, the edits, and the censorship that shaped the Bible used in the West. It is a time capsule. And when you open a time capsule from that far back, you do not just find old things. You find truths that were supposed to be buried. The 81 books they hid from you. But it is not just about how old the book is. It is about what is actually inside of it. Because this is where things get really controversial. Most people in the United States or Europe are used to a Bible that has 66 books. If you are Catholic, maybe you have 73. But the Ethiopian Bible, it has 81 books. That is a massive difference.
Miracles and resurrect from the dead, but according to Christian scripture, he apparently existed with God before creation.
We are not talking about a few missing paragraphs. We are talking about entire books that outline a completely different view of the spiritual world. So, why does Ethiopia have 81 books while everyone else has less? Well, back in the 4th century, church leaders in the Roman Empire held massive meetings to decide which books were in and which were out. They wanted a unified story that was easy to control and easy to teach. Anything that was too weird, too mystical, or too hard to explain got cut. But Ethiopia was not at those meetings. They were thousands of miles away, isolated by deserts and mountains. They didn't get the memo to delete these texts, so they just kept them. One of the heavy hitters they kept is the Book of Enoch. You might have heard whispers about this one. It describes a time when angels, known as the Watchers, came down to Earth and had children with humans, creating a race of giants. It sounds like science fiction, but for the Ethiopian church, this is history. It explains the origins of demons and the Great Flood in a way that the standard book of Genesis just glances over. The West decided this was too dangerous for the average person to read, It was too supernatural, too detailed about the dark side of the spiritual realm. But in the Garima Gospels and the Ethiopian canon, these stories are front and center. And it is not just Enoch. There is the Book of Jubilees, which is basically a secret diary of the early world, offering specific details about dates and events that are vague in the Western Bible. There is the Book of Maccabees and the conflicts it covers. Basically, the Ethiopian Bible offers a director's cut of Christianity. It is the raw, unedited footage before the studio executives came in and trimmed it down for a general audience. And because these books were preserved in Ge'ez, an ancient language that acts like a linguistic fortress, they remain safe from the rewrites that happened in Europe. Now, you have to ask yourself, why were these specific books removed elsewhere? Was it really just about divine inspiration, or was it about control? If you have a book that tells you exactly how the spiritual hierarchy works, how angels operate, and how the ancient world was filled with giants and monsters, you have a population that asks a lot of questions. By removing them, the Western Church simplified the narrative, but Ethiopia kept the complexity. They kept the mystery. And that mystery leads us to the biggest shock of all, the ending of the resurrection story itself. The ending that was never meant to be seen. Most of us know the story of Easter Sunday by heart. The women go to the tomb, the stone is rolled away, the tomb is empty, and then Jesus appears to the disciples. He gives them the Great Commission, tells them to go out into the world, and then ascends to heaven. It is a nice, neat package with a clear conclusion. It gives you closure. But here is the catch. The Garima Gospels do not have that ending. In these ancient manuscripts, the Gospel of Mark stops dead at chapter 16, verse 8. This is known as the short ending. In this version, the women, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, enter the tomb and see a young man dressed in a white robe. He tells them Jesus has risen and is going ahead of them to Galilee. And then the text says, trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone, because they were afraid. And that is it. The end. There is no appearance of Jesus to the disciples. There is no conversation with Thomas. There is no ascension into the clouds. It just ends in fear and silence. Now, later on, scribes in Europe felt this was too abrupt. It felt incomplete. So, centuries later, they added verses 9 through 20 to wrap things up and make it match the other Gospels. But the Garima Gospels, being so old, show us the text before those additions were made. This changes everything about how you read the story. In the version we are used to, everything is resolved for us. We see the victory. But in the Ethiopian version, the story ends on a cliffhanger. It leaves the reader standing there with the women, terrified and confused, forced to make a choice. Do you believe the tomb is empty based on faith alone, or do you need to see the risen body to believe? It puts the weight of belief squarely on your shoulders. This short ending suggests that the earliest Christians lived in a state of high alert. They weren't celebrating a finished victory. They were stepping into a world where the supernatural had just broken into reality, and it was terrifying. It wasn't about a happy ending. It was about the awe and the shock of a reality that had been turned upside down. By keeping this ending, the Garima Gospels preserve a raw, authentic emotion that the polished Western versions tried to smooth over. It is a stark reminder that the resurrection wasn't originally a comfortable story. It was a shocking, earth-shattering event that left people speechless. Guardians of the impossible truth. So, how did this happen? How did a book this important survive in a wooden hut in Africa, while the great libraries of Alexandria and Rome were burning or being censored? It comes down to the people who were holding the keys. The monks of the Abba Garima monastery are not like any librarians you have ever met. These guys are tough. They live a life of absolute dedication, often surviving on very little food and water, dedicating every waking hour to prayer and protection. The legend says that Saint Garima, one of the 9 saints who came to Ethiopia from the Byzantine Empire, wrote these Gospels himself. The story goes that he was writing so fast to finish his work that God actually stopped the sun in the sky to give him more daylight. He finished the entire illuminated manuscript in 24 hours. Now, while the carbon dating says it might have been a team of scribes over a longer period, the miracle part of the story tells us something about how they view these books. To them, these aren't just artifacts. They are holy objects forged by divine intervention. You have to look at the craftsmanship to really get it. The ink they used, it contains gold and silver. The pages are made of goatskin vellum that was processed so perfectly it has not rotted in 1600 years. The binding mechanism, using wooden boards and specific stitching, is a method that historians didn't think existed until centuries later. This proves that Ethiopia wasn't just copying Europe, they were innovating. They were masters of their craft when London was just a muddy village. The environment helped too. The dry air of the Ethiopian highlands is perfect for preserving paper and skin. But the biggest factor was the isolation. Ethiopia has always been a fortress. When Islamic armies swept across North Africa and the Middle East, Ethiopia held out. When European colonizers tried to take over, Ethiopia fought back and won. They call themselves the land of the Ark of the Covenant for a reason. They have a culture of guarding sacred things with their lives. They hid the Garima Gospels during the invasion of the warlord Ahmed Gragan in the 16th century, and they hid them again when the Italians invaded in the 1930s. There were times when these books were reported lost to the outside world, only to be sitting safely in a dark room, watched over by a monk who would rather die than let a stranger take them. It creates this crazy contrast. The most open, revealing, and complete version of the Bible was kept in the most closed-off place on earth. It is almost as if they knew the rest of the world wasn't ready for it. They knew that if these books went to Rome or Paris in the Middle Ages, they would have been burned for being heretical or different. So they kept them safe, waiting for a time when we could actually handle the truth. And that brings us to today. We live in an age of information, yet we are just now finding out about a book that has been there the whole time. It forces us to ask some hard questions. If the Bible is a library of books, who decided to close the library doors after just 66 volumes? Who decided that the story of the Watchers or the terrifying silence of the women at the tomb wasn't official? The Garima Gospels are a wake-up call. They remind us that history is written by the winners, but the truth is often hidden by the survivors. The Ethiopian tradition didn't care about political correctness or making the timeline fit a specific narrative. They cared about preservation. They treated the text like a living thing that needed to be kept whole, warts and all. Does knowing that there are missing books and different endings shake your faith, or does it make you want to dig deeper into the mystery? Let me know what you think in the comments. If this topic fascinated you, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into lost history. Click the video on your screen now to see what else they've been hiding from us.